I am prepared to tell you that I would, at this point, sign an arrest warrant for one or more persons for the crime of murder.
He said he was waiting for one thing, one document. He said it on a live stream weeks ago, and he said it again after that. And every time somebody pushed him for an answer, he gave them the same line. Not yet. Show me the autopsy first. On Wednesday, the 22nd of July, he got the autopsy. And then he said this: I am prepared to tell you that I would at this point sign an arrest warrant for one or more persons for the crime of murder. That's not a commentator. That's not a Facebook page with a siren emoji in the name. That's a man who spent 6.5 years on a Mississippi bench with the authority to sign those exact warrants. Murder cases. Real ones. Real defendants. Real courtrooms. Real signatures. He is not on that bench anymore. He is very clear about that himself. The whole statement is a hypothetical, and we'll get to exactly how he framed it, word for word, because the framing matters. But here's the part nobody's fully unpacked yet. He didn't just give the headline. He then sat there and itemized it, piece by piece, what the pathologist found, what the pathologist was never handed, which officials he wants investigated and why, and one specific detail from the autopsy report that he says pushed him over the line. Some of what he laid out is confirmed by multiple national outlets. Some of it is his own personal observation that nobody else can verify. And at least one claim in there is serious enough that we're going to stop the tape and tell you plainly that we could not confirm it. Because there's a version of this story where you just play the clip and let it rip. And there's a version where you actually check it. We're doing the second one.
So I believe it's time to turn on the light, bring the light of day to every agency that's involved with this investigation.
Start with who he is, because the entire weight of the statement rests on it. Carlos Moore is a practicing attorney. He's licensed in Tennessee. He's based in Atlanta now. He is the 79th president of the National Bar Association, the oldest and largest association of black lawyers and judges in the country. Before all of that, by his own account, he sat on 2 municipal benches in Mississippi. Clarksdale from 2017 to 2024. Grenada from 2020 to 2024. Overlapping, roughly 6.5 years total. And what he emphasizes about those years isn't the title. It's the specific powers that came with it. He could sign search warrants. He could sign arrest warrants. He presided over arraignments, over initial appearances, over preliminary hearings, for people accused of offenses up to and including murder. That's the credential he's leaning on. Not, I watched the news. Not, I read the reports. I have personally held the pen that puts a person's name on a murder warrant, and I have decided more than once whether the evidence in front of me was enough. Now, fairness, because this cuts both ways and you'll hear it thrown at him. Moore's exit from Mississippi was a not quiet. He has publicly described it in adversarial terms. He's written that Mississippi thought it could bury him and that it only planted him. People who don't like what he's saying about this case will point at that history and call it a grudge with a law degree. We're telling you that up front so you can weigh it yourself. But weigh the other thing too. A man who spent 6.5 years signing warrants knows exactly what the words probable cause mean, and he knows exactly what it costs him professionally to say them out loud about a case with no charges in it. He said them anyway. The family didn't trust the state's process. That's not spin. That's the stated reason. Attorney Ben Crump said the family wanted a doctor with no ties to Mississippi law enforcement, so Nolan's body was flown from Mississippi to Washington, D.C. The examination was performed on the 10th of July, 6 days after he disappeared, 4 days after he was found. The pathologist was Dr. Roger Mitchell, board certified in forensic pathology, former chief medical examiner for Washington, D.C., president of the National Medical Association. Moore says he's known him personally for more than 14 years and has hired him for independent autopsies before. Colin Kaepernick paid for it. Tyler Perry covered the funeral. Al Sharpton's National Action Network pledged $50,000 for information. Crump announced the preliminary findings on Wednesday, the 22nd, at the NAACP National Convention in Chicago. Here's what came back. Cause of death, undetermined. Manner of death, undetermined. Both pending further investigation. And this is the line that changed the conversation. Dr. Mitchell could not rule out foul play. Not, there was foul play. Not, he was killed, could not rule it out. That's a specific, careful, clinical phrase, and it lands the way it does because of what the sheriff had said 17 days earlier. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter said investigators did not initially suspect foul play. That was said within about a day of the body being recovered. So you have a sheriff, in 24 hours, saying one thing, and a board-certified forensic pathologist weeks later with the body on a table in front of him, saying he can't get there. That gap is the whole story. Everything else is detail hanging off it. Now, the findings themselves.
Another limitation faced by this forensic pathologist was the absence of the anterior internal neck structures. The trachea and the laryngeal cartilage, the thyroid horn, and the hyoid bone were not received with the body.
Mitchell noted a red discoloration in the soft tissue at the back of Nolan's head. And this is where people online ran ahead of the report, so listen carefully to the actual language. He could not determine whether that discoloration came from blunt force trauma or from ordinary decomposition. He could not say to a reasonable degree of medical certainty which one it was. Possible blunt force. Also, possibly just what happens to a body that spends 2 days in the Gulf in July. He found no fractures, no lacerations, no deep tissue injuries, no broken bones anywhere on the body, and the body was severely decomposed. Badly enough that Mitchell wrote he could not reliably assess the skin surface for bruising or abrasions. Meaning, if there had been defensive marks, grip marks, scrapes, anything, the condition of the body may have erased the ability to see them at all. Then there's the sentence in the report that Moore keeps circling back to, and it's the sharpest thing in the document. Mitchell wrote that when a body is recovered from water and there's a suspicion of drowning, it is important to confirm how that person entered the water, and he specified why that matters so much here. It matters most, he wrote, in the deaths of people who could swim. Nolan could swim. He was an athlete. His parents have said it from day one. Mitchell could not determine whether Nolan was conscious or unconscious when he entered the water. He could not determine whether he was forced or unforced. Those 4 words are doing a tremendous amount of work. Conscious or unconscious. Forced or unforced. The pathologist couldn't answer it. He said the investigation would have to. But here's where Moore's argument actually lives. Because his position isn't really that the autopsy proved something, it's that the autopsy couldn't. Dr. Mitchell went into that examination missing 4 separate categories of evidence, not because he overlooked them, because they weren't there. First, the neck structures. Parts of Nolan's throat and neck interior were absent from the body. They had been retained by the state of Mississippi. Without them, Mitchell could not evaluate whether a neck injury contributed to the death. He could not assess for strangulation. That door stays closed. Second, the airway and the lungs, already removed. So Mitchell could not examine them for water intake. And water in the lungs is one of the primary ways a pathologist confirms a drowning actually happened. Read that again. The independent pathologist, examining a body recovered from the ocean, in a case where the working theory is drowning, could not check the lungs for water. Third, the stomach contents, not available for analysis. Standard practice is to preserve them in a container precisely so they can be examined later, and stomach contents can tell a pathologist a great deal about what happened in a person's final hours. Fourth, toxicology. The independent report included no toxicology at all, and Mitchell had no access to the state's original toxicology results either. 4 categories, 4 doors closed, and Moore's framing of that is blunt. He calls the neck structures mysteriously missing. He asks why Mississippi couldn't have sent a sample, why they couldn't have invited Mitchell down to examine the tissue in person. He says it looks like every key piece of evidence was held back, and that until somebody explains it, people are going to keep using the word cover-up. Now, stop. Because there is an answer to that, and we're going to give it to you, and it comes from the exact same source Moore is relying on. Dr. Mitchell himself noted that removing and retaining those parts is common practice in a medical examiner's autopsy. It's not an anomaly, it is what medical examiners routinely do. Organs and tissue are retained for further testing, for microscopic examination, for the report the state is still writing. The pathologist who was inconvenienced by it said it wasn't necessarily sinister. That matters. It genuinely weakens the darkest reading of this. And if you only ever hear the clip where somebody says the neck was mysteriously missing, you are being handed half a fact. But it doesn't erase Moore's underlying point either. And this is the honest middle. Even if the retention was routine, the effect was the same. The family's independent pathologist was left unable to answer the central question. Common practice can still produce an outcome where the only doctor the family trusts can't rule anything in or out. Both of those things are true at once. Hold them both. Moore's frustration doesn't stop at the pathology. He goes down a list. The first name is Sheriff John Ledbetter, and this is where Moore is angriest. His question is simple. What possessed the sheriff to say no foul play was suspected within roughly a day of the body being found? Moore points out that the sheriff has no medical degree, was not conducting the examination, and had a forensic pathologist working the same case who, weeks later, with more information, still could not rule foul play out. Moore's phrase for it is that it stinks to high heaven. He says he's never going to forget it. For balance, Ledbetter has separately urged the public to contact investigators only with first-hand information, as speculation piled up online, and officials in Ocean Springs, Nolan's hometown, have publicly rallied behind him after he was accused of being derelict in his duties. Second name, Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind. Moore wants transparency from that office. Worth noting on the other side of the ledger, Lind told CNN his office has received numerous drowning victims from Mississippi's barrier islands over the years. The currents out there are known to be rough. That is a real documented pattern, and it is the strongest argument the accident theory has. Third name, and this is the one we have to handle carefully. Dr. Stacy Turner, Mississippi's chief state medical examiner. Moore makes a specific accusation about her record, a claim about a pattern of rulings in previous deaths of young black people, and a characterization of her conclusions as implausible. We could not verify that claim, not through news archives, not through public records reporting. What we can tell you is that Moore is calling for her work in this case to be independently reviewed, and that the state's own autopsy report, hers, not Mitchell's, has not been made public. Fourth, Sean Tyndall, Mississippi's Commissioner of Public Safety. Moore wants him to send the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation in to assist. Fifth, Attorney General Lynn Fitch. Moore wants her Public Integrity Division to open an inquiry, specifically into whether any elected or appointed official has obstructed justice or tampered with evidence. His argument is that if everyone's clean, nobody should mind the light. And sixth, the district attorney, which is where this gets uncomfortable because Moore doesn't spare her either.
Do a very thorough investigation. In this instance, I wouldn't trust anyone. Don't give anybody the benefit of the doubt. I believe we need to shine the light on everyone. What possessed Sheriff Ledbetter to say that no foul play was suspected within 24 hours of them finding Nolan Wells? Here you have a forensic pathologist that still cannot rule out foul play, but the sheriff with no medical degree, and I don't even know if he has a college degree, was just so ready to say that no foul play was suspected.
To explain why he wants the prosecutor investigated too, Moore reaches for a comparison. Ahmaud Arbery. His point is that in that case, they eventually had to investigate the prosecutor herself. That's true, and the details are worth getting exactly right, because Moore's version leaves out how it ended. Jackie Johnson was the district attorney in the Brunswick Judicial Circuit in Georgia when Ahmaud Arbery was chased down and killed in 2020. It took more than 2 months for arrests to be made. One of the men involved, Greg McMichael, was a former investigator in Johnson's own office. Georgia's Attorney General ordered an investigation. In September of 2021, Johnson was indicted on 2 counts, violating her oath of office and obstructing a police officer. Here's the part Moore doesn't mention. She was cleared. Her trial ran in early 2025. On the 3rd of February, the judge granted a directed verdict acquitting her of the obstruction count, saying from the bench that he hadn't heard one scintilla of evidence to support it. 2 days later, on the 5th of February, the same judge threw out the remaining felony indictment over technical errors in how it was worded. The case ended before it ever reached the jury. The 3 men who killed Ahmaud Arbery were convicted of murder and of federal hate crimes. The prosecutor accused of shielding them walked away with no conviction at all. Now, does that destroy Moore's point? No. If anything, it sharpens the version of it he's actually making, which is narrower than the headline. His argument is that a prosecutor is not automatically above scrutiny just because she holds the office, and that in the Arbery case, it took an outside authority to even ask the question. That stands. But you should know that when he holds up that case as an example, the ending was an acquittal and a dismissal, not a conviction. If you're following this case, take a second and subscribe to this channel. A grand jury decision here can land without warning, and there's no press conference scheduled for the moment it does.
The FBI is already involved. I want the FBI to do more than look at those death threats that judge and her family is getting. I want them to look at the evidence that leads to a conviction for those responsible for what could be the murder of Nolan Wells. Do more than look after their interests, to look after the interests of Nolan Wells so that he and his family can get justice.
Moore's federal ask has a specific legal hook in it, and it's the most technically interesting thing he says. Horn Island is federal property. It's part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore, an uninhabited, federally protected wilderness area roughly 10 miles off the Mississippi coast, with no facilities, no restrooms, no shelter, no communications. Nolan's body was found there by a National Park Service ranger. Moore's argument is that this creates concurrent jurisdiction. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department isn't the only agency that could be running this. The federal government has standing to act on its own. So he wants the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Mississippi to say something publicly, to open a file, and to run a concurrent investigation rather than waiting on the state. He wants the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice involved, on the grounds that this case has carried racial undertones from the beginning, and somebody needs to determine whether race played any part. And he has a pointed request for the FBI, because the FBI is already here. That's confirmed. The Bureau has stated it is working to address interstate threats received by individuals connected to this case. Commissioner Tyndall has publicly said the FBI is investigating threats made against public officials, against potential witnesses, and against families. Those threats are real and they are ugly. Jackson County Chancery, Judge Ashley Cole, the stepmother of Warren Hudson, one of the young men who was on that trip, posted screenshots of messages sent to her family. One warned about a package arriving at her office. One said her boys were going to be strangled. Treseston Shepard, another of Nolan's friends who was on the island, told ABC News he's received threats too, and that he's worried for his friends and his family. Moore's position is not that those threats don't matter. It's that the federal government can not only be here for that. His words, roughly, do more than look after their interests. Look after Nolan's. He wants the same federal resources aimed at the death itself.
We want the U.S. Attorney out of the Southern District of Mississippi to go on record and say something about this case. He needs to make sure that his office has an open file and is doing due diligence and doing a concurrent investigation. We do know that Horn Island is federal property, and they have concurrent jurisdiction with the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. we would like the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice to get involved and bring their resources to bear, because there has been a lot of racial undertones, and they need to determine if race had any part to play in Nolan's disappearance and his ultimate death.
So, where does he land? He set it up himself. He reminds his audience that on an earlier live stream, he told them he wasn't ready, that he'd said at the time there was already enough for him to sign a search warrant, that there were lesser offenses he'd have signed an arrest warrant for. But the ultimate question, murder, he said he'd hold until the autopsy. Then he answers it, and the exact construction matters, so here it is properly. Sitting there on the 22nd of July, 2026, he says that with his 6.5 years of experience as a municipal judge, if an investigator brought him an affidavit recounting several things, including the discoloration behind the head, he is prepared to tell you that he would, at this point, sign an arrest warrant for one or more persons for the crime of murder. One or more persons. He says that phrase repeatedly. Never once does he narrow it to a single individual, and never once does he name anyone. He goes further on the reasoning. He says he believes the circumstantial evidence leads him to conclude it is more likely than not that Nolan Wells was murdered, rather than that he accidentally drowned. More likely than not. That's a probability standard, and a low one. It is not beyond a reasonable doubt. It is not a conviction. Probable cause is the threshold to arrest somebody, not to convict them. And every judge who has ever signed one knows the difference. And there is no warrant. There is no arrest. Nobody has been charged with anything in this case. Moore is not on the bench and cannot sign anything. He is describing what he would have done in a chair he no longer occupies. That is the honest shape of the statement. It's still remarkable. It's just not what a lot of the headlines said it was. So what's in the affidavit he's imagining? He walks it. The phone. Nolan's phone came back off that island without him. That's confirmed by multiple outlets. His best friend, Javen Williams, who was also on Horn Island that day, told the Biloxi Sun-Herald that both he and Nolan had left their phones on the boat Nolan had come out on. So the boat left. The phone left. Nolan didn't. His mother, Christine Wansley, has said she believes messages and images were deleted from that phone. Her stated reason is that she found no saved Snapchat photos or videos from that entire day, which she said would be unlike her son. He documented everything. That is her belief, based on what she found. It has not been independently established, and both sides agreed on the 15th of July to a mutual inspection of the phone by experts from each party. So there may eventually be a real answer. Moore adds a further allegation, that Nolan was heard demanding his phone back. He himself flags it as alleged. We could not verify it, and we're not treating it as established. The keys. Moore says Nolan's father had to go and ask for the car keys, and that there was a delay in getting them. Nobody brought them to him. We have not been able to confirm that independently. It's Moore's account. The conflicting stories. This one is confirmed, and it's the strongest item on his list. There are two versions of Nolan's last conversation, and they contradict each other. Version 1, from the young men who left on the boat. Nolan told them he was staying behind to talk to a girl. Judge Ashley Cole posted that her son spoke to Nolan around 3 in the afternoon, that Nolan indicated he'd catch a ride back with another group, and that Nolan made the decision to stay. Version 2 comes from the other side of that same conversation. The young woman has been reported as 19-year-old Katie McCormick. She has not spoken publicly herself. Her sister Gracie told the Daily Mail that Katie had a conversation with Nolan and assumed he was getting ready to board the boat he'd come out on. Her sister's words, Katie assumed the friends telling him to get on the boat wouldn't have left him. So one side says he chose to stay. The other side says she thought he was leaving. Ben Crump has said the same thing from the family's side. One account has Nolan saying he was going back to the boat. The other has him saying he was staying. Both cannot be right. The absences. This is the most personal thing Moore says. and the least verifiable, so we're going to handle it the way it should be handled. Moore says certain people who called themselves Nolan's friends did not join the search on the 5th of July. He says they went and had breakfast and went on with their day. He also says he personally attended Nolan's funeral and that some of those same people were not there. That is his eyewitness account. Nobody can check it, and we are not naming anyone in connection with it, because an absence from a funeral is not evidence of a crime, and the people in this case are already getting messages about strangling children. What we will report is the other half of what he said, because he made a point of saying it, and it deserves the same airtime. Moore said that several young men who had been attacked online, accused by internet sleuths, were at that funeral. He named Javen Williams and another friend. He said he believes they served as pallbearers. He said he took a photograph with them. And he said he watched them physically weeping. His words? That is the normal reaction of friends when your friend dies suddenly. That's a former judge saying, on his own live stream, that some of the people the internet convicted showed up and grieved. If you're going to take his suspicions seriously, take that seriously too. The silence. And then there's the thing that isn't a piece of evidence. It's the absence of one.
That's very, very suspicious. If you are such a friend of someone that you grew up from childhood to adulthood, but you don't attend their funeral to express your condolences to their parents in person. I saw some other people that some of you Facebook sleuths have criticized. I even took a picture with at least one of the guys you've criticized, but yet and still he was at the funeral. He did not care about you criticizing him and saying he may have had something to do with it.
There were hundreds of people on Horn Island that day. Boats everywhere. A holiday crowd. By some accounts, 200, 300, 400 people. Not one of them has come forward to say they saw Nolan Wells go into the water. Not one has said they saw him take a swim or dive or struggle or go under. Moore's point about that is sharp. If it were a simple accident, a swim, a current, a bad moment, reporting it costs nothing. You don't need a lawyer to say you saw somebody go under. It would be the easiest call in the world to make, and it would end the family's agony in an afternoon. 3 weeks on, nobody has made it, and the boat. Underneath all of it sits the timeline problem. At around 4 in the afternoon on the 4th of July, a teenager on the boat Nolan came out on called Sea Tow, a private towing company, not 911. He told the dispatcher they were at the west tip of Horn, their bilge pump had stopped working, and they were sinking. He asked them to come. He said he wanted the boat unsank and towed back. The dispatcher asked if everyone aboard was in good health otherwise. The caller said yes. 7 people on board. And here's the twist that surfaced later. Sea Tow says it never actually towed that boat. In a statement to NBC News, the company said that before assistance was rendered, the vessel owner advised that Sea Tow was no longer needed because help had already been obtained. Their involvement ended there. Some early reporting said the boat was towed about 3 miles and returned around 5:45. Treat that as unsettled. Warren Hudson has since said publicly on a podcast that he didn't travel out to the island on the same boat Nolan did, that he had a couple of conversations with Nolan out there, and that he came back to land on the boat that started taking on water. So, a group in a boat that's flooding, a rushed departure, a friend left behind on a federally protected island with no facilities and no way to call anyone because his phone was on the boat, a phone that came back without him, a tow call that wasn't a 911 call, 2 versions of the same goodbye, a funeral with some chairs empty, and hundreds of witnesses, none of whom saw anything. On their own, not one of those is proof of a crime. Together, a former judge says it clears probable cause. Now here's what most people covering this haven't caught up to. Moore recorded that live stream on Wednesday. On Thursday, the 23rd, District Attorney Angel Myers McIlrath released a video statement of her own. She didn't answer the accusations directly. She explained the silence. She said her office's limited public comment is not indifference. She said it's a legal requirement, that in Mississippi, the rules of professional conduct restrict what a prosecutor can release during an investigation. her words. Our restraint in communicating facts and evidence is not an effort to keep the truth from the public. It is an effort to protect the integrity of this investigation and the grand jury proceeding. She said her community is grieving, that Nolan's family deserves answers and the community deserves answers. She said something a lot of people genuinely didn't know, that in Jackson County, every death, except those from natural causes and non-criminal car wrecks, goes to a grand jury, not just suspicious ones, all of them. She said she's handled death investigations that way her entire career, and that Nolan's case is being handled the same way, with the same care. She said her office is not taking time for time's sake. It's taking the time the work requires. Every piece of evidence examined, every credible lead followed, every witness interview analyzed against all the other evidence, and then the line that will frustrate people the most, but is probably the truest thing in the statement. The pressure for answers does not change what the work requires. Her office also confirmed something significant. The state's autopsy report, Mississippi's own, the one Dr. Mitchell never saw, will be withheld until a grand jury can review it. So the document at the center of everything stays sealed. You can read her statement two ways, and honest people do. Either it's a prosecutor following the ethics rules she's bound by and refusing to try a case on YouTube, or it's an institution asking a community with a long memory to extend trust it has no reason to extend. Moore's answer to that is the one he keeps repeating. He isn't asking anyone to be presumed guilty. He's asking for outside eyes. If everything was done by the book, an investigation confirms it, and everybody moves on. 3 weeks and change since a park ranger found an 18-year-old in the water off the northwestern tip of Horn Island at around 8:45 in the morning. Here is what is actually settled. The independent autopsy found cause and manner of death undetermined. Foul play could not be ruled out. There was a red discoloration at the back of the head that could be trauma or could be decomposition. No fractures, no lacerations. Nobody can say whether he entered that water conscious or unconscious, forced or unforced. The state's report is sealed until a grand jury sees it. The district attorney has committed to presenting the case. The FBI is here, but for the threats. The governor has blamed Ben Crump and Al Sharpton for stoking division, without offering evidence linking their statements to any specific threat. The NAACP has said local law enforcement can't handle this, and a former Mississippi judge with 6.5 years of warrant signing authority has gone on the record saying that if he still held that pen, he'd use it. The Cito audio came out in full this week. The company says it never towed the boat. The autopsy that could answer the question is locked in a drawer. And somewhere in a crowd of several hundred people on a federal island on the 4th of July, there is a person who saw something and has said nothing. That person is the whole case. Everything in this video is a report on statements made publicly and on the record. No one has been arrested or charged in connection with Nolan Wells' death. Carlos Moore is a former judge who holds no current judicial authority and was describing, hypothetically, what he says he would do if he were still on the bench. Nothing here is a legal conclusion, and nothing here is an accusation against any named individual. The claims we could not verify, we told you we could not verify. If you want to know the moment a grand jury moves, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. This case has people watching from a lot further away than Jackson County.